Hello there. My name is Evelyn Whitmore, and last spring, my only son told me not to come to his promotion party. It's just colleagues, he said, as if I hadn't once built the very company he works for. I showed up anyway, quietly, gift in hand. But when the security guard stopped me and my son said nothing, I realized I was no longer welcome. But then a guest stood up, bowed deeply, and said 7 words that silenced the entire room. You won't believe what happened next. You don't have to come, Mother. It's mostly colleagues anyway. The words lingered in Evelyn's ears like the aftertaste of something politely sour. She replayed the voicemail not for clarity, but to examine its tone the way her son's voice tiptoed around formality, as if delivering news to a distant acquaintance. Just a small thing. Informal. Mostly colleagues, he'd said 3 times with a chuckle so practiced it scraped at her. The morning light streamed through the kitchen windows of her son's home in San Mateo, California. It was the kind of golden April sunlight that hinted at spring's full bloom, casting neat, warm rectangles across the sleek marble counters. The air smelled of nothing, no percolating coffee, no buttered toast, no lavender from the sachets she used to tuck in linen drawers. Silence, not serenity, filled the room. Evelyn stood in the kitchen, carefully spooning loose-leaf tea into a ceramic pot. She preferred loose leaf. Tea bags felt hasty. She moved with precision ritual, etched from years of boardroom breakfasts and silent Sunday mornings alone. Isabel had already left for work, her perfume still clinging to the hallway like a polite afterthought. Nathan had said something about meetings, about a driver coming later, about the menu being taken care of. She brought the teapot to the table and sat down, facing the pale beige wall. Her hand brushed against the linen napkin as she poured. Everything in this house was coordinated, muted, pristine. Even the cutlery made no sound when handled. The whole place whispered composure. Nathan entered a few minutes later, sleeves rolled, phone tucked to his ear. He gave her a nod, halfway between greeting and acknowledgement. I think Isabel's worried about space, he said, slipping the phone into his blazer. You know, seating charts and all that. It's really just a work thing. No need for you to feel obligated. Evelyn smiled, small, unreadable. Of course, she replied, voice calm. I understand. But something in the pause after understand didn't sit right. Nathan caught it, but didn't hold it. He kissed her cheek lightly, already distracted, then disappeared into the front hallway with his car keys jingling. After breakfast, Evelyn cleaned the kitchen with habitual care. She washed each cup, dried every plate, arranged the cutlery drawer. Then, without a word, she slipped into the garage. The air there was cooler, filled with the faint scent of cardboard oil and long-forgotten things. She moved slowly, her fingers skimming over boxes labeled with Nathan's college memorabilia, Isabel's seasonal decor, Sophie's baby clothes. Then she found the one with faded marker EW, office. Inside, the past murmured. Handwritten notes, leadership plaques, holiday cards from employees long gone. A stock certificate still clipped to a thank you card. To the best CEO I ever had, Mike, 2009. Beneath it all lay a leather-bound sketchbook. Its cover was worn corners, softened by time, and the friction of hesitation. After the party was written on the first page in her own looping script. She hadn't opened it since retiring. She hadn't dared. But today she did. The pages flipped under her hands like chapters of a book she never finished. A conference table here, a champagne glass left full there. Then she stopped at the last page, a blank expanse waiting for something to arrive. She picked up a pencil from the side pocket and, after a breath, drew a long table. Empty. Not even chairs yet, just the shape, the suggestion. A table that waited. Later in her room, she dressed slowly. A charcoal blazer, soft grey blouse, pearl earrings, understated but deliberate. She opened the drawer of her nightstand and retrieved a small silver gift box tied with a thin navy ribbon. Downstairs, the house was quiet again. Only the sound of the wind brushing against the glass. Evelyn placed the box on the console table near the front door. She adjusted its position slightly, then stood still for a long moment, letting silence settle. "I'll go," she said to no one in particular. "Just for a minute." "She's not on the list, sir." The words sliced through the soft murmur of violins and clinking glasses at La Veranda Hotel. The lobby shimmered with crystalline elegance, glass chandeliers casting snowflake shadows across the marble floor. Guests dressed in tailored suits and silk gowns drifting like silk through the grand foyer. Evelyn stood quietly at the check-in table, her clutch held with both hands, her name already spoken. She wore a navy sheath dress, not quite as snug as it had once been, but dignified, pressed, and worn with purpose. She had first worn it years ago at her inaugural shareholders' summit as CEO. Back then, it fit like armor. Tonight, it held like memory. The young receptionist hesitated, tapping twice, frowning slightly. "Whitmore." "Evelyn." "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your name doesn't appear to be listed." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "There must be a mistake," she said softly, but not without steel. "This is the Whitmore promotion event, yes." Before the receptionist could respond, a familiar voice intervened. Evelyn Nathan approached tie already loosened a touch, his expression unreadable. For a brief second, his eyes darted toward the receptionist's screen, then to Evelyn's dress, then to the space behind her as if searching for a suitable distraction. "There's been a mix-up, maybe," he said. "The guest list, Isabel handled it. It's been a bit chaotic." From beside him, Isabel emerged in a fitted ivory gown, graceful as always. "Oh dear," she said lightly, placing a hand on Nathan's arm. "We must have sent the wrong version to the concierge." "So sorry, Evelyn. It's so packed inside, I'm not sure there's an extra seat." Her smile was kind. Her eyes weren't. A suited guard, young and impeccably polite, stepped forward. "Ma'am, I can help escort you to the lounge area if you'd like to wait. It's a bit more comfortable." Evelyn looked at her son, hoping for a word, a gesture, anything. But Nathan's face had settled into that practiced calm, his corporate mask polished and bland. She nodded once. "No need. Thank you." She turned. No coat check, no drink offered, no welcome. Behind her, the violins played on a Mendelssohn piece, perhaps. Evelyn began to step away when a voice called out, warm and deep. Evelyn Whitmore, Harold Eastman, cane in hand, glasses slightly askew, cut across the room like a man younger than his years. He hadn't changed much, just the silver had deepened, the gait slowed. "Dear God," he muttered then louder to the room. "You don't know who this woman is, do you?" The reception quieted. Forks halted mid-air. Harold stopped just short of her, then bowed, not a quick nod, but a full, respectful, deliberate gesture. He held it. "She used to run this room," he said, without raising his head. "And most of you didn't even know." A ripple passed through the space. Whispers floated like feathers. Someone near the bar froze mid-sip. Nathan stared, pale, frozen. Isabel's smile cracked, though only slightly. Harold straightened. Evelyn met his eyes, nodded once, then turned without a word. No trace of pride, no flare of triumph, just the poise of a woman, long trained in grace under siege. She walked toward the exit slowly. Her shoes made no sound against the carpet. At the edge of the foyer, she paused. The small silver gift box, still in her hand, remained unopened. She did not leave it behind. She did not hand it to anyone. Outside, the air smelled faintly of wisteria and city heat. She stood under a canopy of light and shadow, looking out toward the valet lane. I remember everything she whispered, and so will they. I started recording everything 9 years ago, not to accuse, just not to forget. The words sat quietly in the back of Evelyn's mind as she stepped out of the elevator and into the stillness of the house. The faint scent of lilac from Isabel's room had long faded. Upstairs, muted laughter drifted from Sophie's room, tiny, bright, unaware. Evelyn didn't go upstairs. Instead, she turned left toward the door no one used but her. The old garage converted long ago into a quiet sanctuary. Not even Isabel knew what was in there. Nathan had asked once years ago if she still kept tools inside. She had nodded, and he hadn't asked again. She switched on the light. A single bulb flickered above, joined by the low hum of a ceiling fan that turned in reluctant circles. The walls were lined with storage cabinets, but her focus was the wooden desk near the back, dustless and ordered. A laptop rested atop it, old but functional. Next to it sat a single folder labelled in Evelyn's cursive family support. She pulled her chair in fingers, brushing the keyboard, and entered a password no one else would have guessed. The desktop background was plain, save for a single shortcut, support chronicle.xlcx. The file opened with a quiet chime. Evelyn scrolled past column headers, date amount purpose status notes, until her eyes landed on the first entry. March 2015. Down payment for Nathan's condo, $180,000. He said he'd pay me back in 5 years. She didn't sigh, didn't frown. She just kept scrolling. Car loan, student debt consolidation, fertility treatments, Sophie's preschool tuition, medical bills after Isabel's surgery, all without contracts, all without conditions. Just trust written in rows and numbers. A soft knock pulled her attention. Sophie stood in the doorway, tiny and barefoot, holding a drawing in both hands. "Grandma," she whispered, "I made you a house." Evelyn smiled, setting the laptop aside. She took the drawing carefully. A square with lopsided windows, crayon flowers, and a stick figure waving by the door. At the top, Sophie had written in careful, wobbly letters, "Grandma's house." A crack opened in Evelyn's chest. She didn't speak, just pulled Sophie gently into a hug, pressing the drawing to her heart. After a moment, she walked the girl back to her room, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. When she returned to the garage, the cursor blinked on the spreadsheet like a heartbeat. She clicked on another file. Cancellation. List. Docs. A new document opened. June 2017. Disney trip cancelled. Nathan said bonus was delayed. May 2019. Alaska cruise cancelled. Isabel pregnant funds reallocated fall 2020. Yale tuition deposit for Sophie refunded. Nathan decided public school sufficient, line by line. Evelyn read and remembered. Each entry not a complaint, but a ledger of what could have been, of generosity turned invisible. The garage door creaked open. Olivia Chen stepped in cautiously, carrying her briefcase and a tired smile. She had aged into her confidence, sharper now with darker lipstick and a steadier gaze, but Evelyn recognized her immediately. "You look exactly the same," Olivia said, "except the power suit is gone." Evelyn chuckled. "The suits are in storage, but the discipline remains." They sat across from each other. Evelyn handed her a USB. "Off the record, she said I need help reviewing something." Olivia loaded the Excel file, and within minutes, her brows knit. "You gave over $1.2 million, she whispered, "with no contracts." Nothing notarized, Evelyn leaned back, serene. That was the contract. That I believed in him. For a long time, neither spoke. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. The ceiling fan creaked with quiet rhythm. Olivia closed the laptop gently. What do you plan to do next? Evelyn looked at the screen, then at the child's drawing beside it. Remember, she said, and then act accordingly. I almost sent it. Then I told myself maybe next year would be better. Evelyn sat on the edge of the small twin bed, the thin quilt tucked around her like a half-hearted embrace. The bedside lamp cast a soft amber glow across the beige walls. There was no window, just a vent that occasionally breathed warm air from somewhere deeper in the house. The room had once been the guest den, then storage, then a catch-all. Now it was hers. She reached into the bottom drawer of the narrow nightstand, fingers brushing past a tissue pack, a broken reading light, and finally an envelope creased, slightly yellowed at the edges. It wasn't sealed, never had been. Carefully, she slid the letter out and unfolded the paper. November 29th, 2019. Dear Nathan. Yesterday you told me there wouldn't be space. Isabel had too many guests. You said it gently as always, with care. You always try to spare me the blade, but the knife still lands. I made the sweet potato casserole anyway, the same one Dad loved. Remember I wrapped it in foil and drove to your house at noon. I left it on the doorstep. No one came out. I sat in the car for 23 minutes. I told myself you were busy, that Sophie was napping, that I was overreacting. Then I drove home, alone. I'm still your mother, Nathan, not your burden. Love, Mom. Evelyn folded the letter again, slowly. The handwriting remained neat, unaffected by the years. But her hands trembled now ever so slightly. She thought of Marston. Her late husband never would have tolerated the silence. He would have knocked on the door, marched in, demanded to know why the woman who once carried a company through 2 recessions was being left to eat alone on Thanksgiving. But Marston was gone. And Evelyn endured. She remembered that day with sharp clarity, the warmth of the casserole dish in her lap, the coolness of the steering wheel, the way a plastic turkey decoration on the lawn bobbed in the wind like it was mocking her. She had gone home, poured herself a glass of white wine, and watched It's a Wonderful Life without turning on the sound. Now, in the quiet of this makeshift room, she slipped the letter into a new envelope. Fresh paper, clean seal. She didn't address it. She didn't need to. The next morning, sunlight crept under the doorframe. Evelyn had already dressed the letter tucked in the same drawer again. She stood in the kitchen pouring tea into a china cup when Olivia arrived. "You're up early?" Olivia said, setting her coat on the chair. "Old habits," Evelyn replied. They sat at the table, soft clinks of porcelain accompanying the silence. Olivia glanced at a folder beside Evelyn's mug. "What's that?" "An old draft." Evelyn said, her voice neutral. "A letter I never sent." "To Nathan?" Evelyn nodded. "I wrote it to be read," she said after a pause. "But maybe not by him." The silence lingered a moment longer, not awkward, just full. Then Olivia reached over, opened her briefcase, and pulled out a thick folder. "Let's talk about the board now." He signed it. I buried it. The report sat on the desk like a quiet ghost, its top page stamped in faded red ink, confidential, not for distribution. Olivia had found it 2 hours earlier, tucked in a manila folder in the corner cabinet of her firm's archive room, a room rarely visited its air stale with the dust of old decisions and paper trails that were never meant to resurface. Evelyn stared at it. The signature on the final page was unmistakable. Nathan's. Confident, unhesitating. As if he knew she'd never let it go further. Olivia sat across from her, not speaking. She let the silence stretch. Evelyn lifted the report, flipping through the pages slowly. The numbers were familiar, the layout unchanged since her years in the boardroom. But it was the memo from Roger, typed, dated, and flagged, that tightened her chest. In March 2016, it was discovered that Mr. Nathan Whitmore redirected $235,000 from the Discretionary Contingency Fund into a private venture labeled WHT Labs. This action was taken without board approval or accounting disclosure. Roger had been meticulous. He always was. Evelyn closed her eyes. The memory came back in pieces. Roger's knock on her office door, his voice steady but uncomfortable. The silent drive home that night, the weight of that number pressing against her ribs. Nathan had stood in the kitchen, not defensive, just detached. "It's temporary, Mum. You know I'll pay it back once we close Series A." She had told him no. He had looked at her like she was an obstacle, not a mother. The next morning, she called Roger in early. They adjusted the records, covered the gap. The board never saw it. "I thought I was saving him," Evelyn said now, her voice lower. "But I was just delaying his fall." Olivia leaned forward. "Do you know what this means today? I do. If this surfaces, he could lose his license, possibly face a hearing. Then maybe he should finally earn it," Evelyn replied, eyes not leaving the document. "Everything he built rests on a shadow I allowed." Outside the hallway buzzed faintly with Friday conversations, mundane, irrelevant. Inside the room held its breath. Evelyn reached for her laptop. She typed slowly, deliberately. A new folder, Redemption and Risk. Inside it, she saved a PDF scan of the report. Nothing else for now. She stared at the blinking cursor for a while before speaking again. "You once told me you wanted to work in law because you believed in second chances." Olivia nodded. "I still do." Evelyn smiled faintly. "So do I. But only if someone earns it. No judgment, no bitterness. Just truth aged, like the wine she used to sip while reading quarterly reviews, back when Nathan would sit cross-legged at her feet, playing with model trains and asking, 'What does a president do, Mommy?' She had told him. A president protects what matters most. And once upon a time that meant shielding him. But now it meant protecting something else. As Olivia gathered the files and stepped out to take a call, Evelyn opened a blank document. At the top, she typed the title, Redemption and Risk. She paused, hands resting on the keyboard. Outside the window, clouds moved slowly past the sun, casting long shadows across the parking lot. A breeze stirred the blinds, and for the first time in weeks, Evelyn felt the air shift around her, not colder, not warmer, just different. There's something odd in the way silence fills a room that used to hold noise. The kitchen used to be full of clatter cutlery against porcelain coffee, brewing morning greetings half mumbled over toast. But this Sunday, it sat in a hush that wasn't peace. Just space filled with breath and withheld words. The sunlight streamed through the slatted blinds, casting long gold lines across the breakfast table. Evelyn sat at the far end, a folded newspaper in front of her, not to read, just something to hold. Nathan was already seated, scrolling absently on his phone, his coffee mug untouched, empty. Isabel stepped in, dressed neatly in pale linen, her voice breezy. "I was thinking of taking Sophie to the pool this morning. The weather's perfect." Nathan gave a half nod, not looking up. Evelyn glanced at her daughter-in-law, then back to the paper. No one asked if she wanted to come. On the table sat reheated quiche from last night, slightly rubbery at the edges. No fresh coffee. No buttered toast. Evelyn had brewed herself a weak cup of chamomile earlier and left it cooling beside the salt shaker. Sophie sat cross-legged beneath the table, a box of crayons open on the tiled floor tongue, sticking out in concentration. She looked up once and asked, "Grandma, did you used to run a building?" Evelyn lowered the newspaper, smiling faintly. "I used to build them." A silence dropped heavier than before. Isabel dropped her spoon, the clink sharp against ceramic. Nathan's finger froze mid-scroll. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't need to. She placed the newspaper aside and said softly, "What we build stays, even if others forget." No reply. Just the whir of the ceiling fan and the scratch of Sophie's crayon on paper. Nathan pushed his plate slightly forward. "I have calls this afternoon," he murmured, standing up. Isabel nodded. "We won't be long at the pool." Sophie tugged at Evelyn's sleeve, holding up her drawing a house with large windows and a long dining table. On one side of the table sat a stick figure with grey hair. The other seats were empty. "Is this our house?" Evelyn asked gently. Sophie shook her head. "It's Grandma's. But I don't know who's coming to dinner." Evelyn blinked, swallowing something tender and sharp all at once. Maybe they haven't arrived yet. Upstairs, Nathan's phone buzzed on the counter, lighting up briefly. Evelyn saw the name flash on screen before it dimmed. Richard Eastman. Emergency review meeting Wednesday. She didn't reach for it. She didn't even blink. She simply picked up her cold cup of tea and took a sip, her eyes fixed on the drawing in Sophie's lap. Outside, the sky was impossibly blue, the kind of day people described as perfect on postcards in idle conversation. But the air inside the house was still unmoving, like everything important had gone underground waiting for a shift. Some chairs stay empty until the right person returns. The chair at the center of the long walnut table had remained untouched for years. No one had dared to sit in it, not out of respect, but out of discomfort. Like it carried too much memory, too much quiet authority. Today, for the first time in nearly a decade, a small white card with serif lettering rested on the polished wood E. Whitmore. Evelyn entered the room without hurry. She wore charcoal grey, a silk scarf knotted neatly at the neck. Not extravagant, but purposeful. Her cane tapped lightly on the hardwood floor as she made her way to the chair that used to be hers, not symbolically, but structurally. Nathan was already seated 3 spots down, his expression carefully neutral. Olivia sat opposite him, a leather folio closed in front of her hands, folded. Richard, silver-haired and soft-spoken, sat at the head of the table, glancing at the agenda with unreadable eyes. "Let's begin," Richard said. Nathan stood and launched into a presentation about the expansion project slides appearing on the wall behind him in crisp animations. Market forecasts, ROI projections, strategic partnerships. He spoke fluently, convincingly. But Evelyn had once coached men far sharper than him. She heard the slight tremor under his tone, the kind that didn't come from nerves, but from uncertainty cloaked in polish. When he finished, Richard waited a beat. "Any comments before we move to vote?" Olivia opened her folio. "I have a printed copy of the 2016 audit anomaly as requested." Nathan's hand twitched. He didn't look at her. Olivia passed the pages down. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. Richard looked over the top sheet. "This was never disclosed." "No," Olivia said evenly. "It was resolved privately. Funds were returned, but it bypassed protocol." The room stilled. Evelyn finally raised her eyes. "I object to proceeding with the vote." Richard turned. On what grounds, Evelyn, she met his gaze. On history and ethics. "I'm not here as Nathan's mother. I'm here as a founding shareholder of Whitmore Lane. This proposal relies on integrity. If our foundation isn't clean, We shouldn't build higher. A quiet inhale ran through the room. One of the minor board members, young, cautious, glanced at the documents. If this becomes public, the press will tie it directly to us. Evelyn nodded. That's why we address it now internally, not to punish, but to protect what we've built. Nathan shifted in his seat. This happened years ago and wasn't acknowledged, Olivia said, not raising her voice. We're not rewriting history. We're accepting it. Richard closed the folder gently. We'll suspend the vote for 72 hours. An independent review will be scheduled immediately. Silence followed. No protests. Just the soft scrape of chairs shifting as people stood unsure where to look. Evelyn remained seated for a moment longer, her fingers resting on the table's edge. The light from the east-facing windows caught the silver in her hair, and for a second it was easy to imagine her younger, commanding this very room with certainty, not nostalgia. She rose slowly. As she turned, Nathan looked at her not with rage or shame, but with something harder to place. Like watching the past walk back in, not to haunt, but to remind. Outside, the elevator chimed softly. Don't call it betrayal, Nathan. Call it balance. The house was too quiet. Sophie had gone to bed early, her bedtime story cut short by Isabel's distracted tone. Now only the ticking of the wall clock filled the kitchen in rhythm with the slow hum of the refrigerator. The dinner table still held remnants of a meal no one really touched. Roasted chicken now cold. A half-finished salad wilting in its bowl. The scent of cooling grease lingered like a ghost of a family gathering that never quite happened. Evelyn sat at the edge of the table, her cup of tea barely touched both hands, wrapped around the ceramic for warmth. Nathan stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at nothing. He didn't raise his voice when he spoke. What are you doing? She didn't blink. Saving what's left. He turned to her eyes, sharp. You humiliated me. Isabel entered quietly, her heels soft against the hardwood. We didn't ask for your help. Evelyn tilted her head. You asked for money. You accepted silence. That was help. Isabel shifted, visibly uncomfortable, but holding her composure. This is about control, isn't it? You couldn't stand being irrelevant. I never needed control, Evelyn replied evenly. But I do have memory. And memory is dangerous to those who rewrite history. Nathan ran a hand through his hair. You think this makes you noble? Dragging this out in front of the board, I didn't drag anything Evelyn said. I simply stopped hiding it. The silence after that wasn't empty. It pulsed, pressed against the walls. Isabel moved to the counter, tapping her nails against her phone screen, then stopping suddenly. You're sabotaging your own family. Evelyn's voice was quiet. No, I'm protecting the one I once believed we were. Nathan scoffed under his breath. You used to fix things. Quietly, cleanly. Evelyn's lips curled, not in a smile. You used to call me the fixer. I haven't changed, only who I fix for. His face hardened the mask, cracking not from rage, but from realization. The board wouldn't protect him now, not automatically, not with Evelyn in the room. Isabel looked between them, her mind calculating angles faster than her pulse. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. We need a counter-story. Fast. Something to shift the narrative. Nathan didn't object. He just looked tired. Evelyn stood slowly placing her teacup in the sink without a sound. As she turned, her gaze passed over them, not with judgment, but with clarity. Then she walked toward the hallway, the light dimming behind her. Behind her, Isabel whispered, She's not done. No, Nathan replied. She's just starting. He would have known what to do, Marston. I hope I still do. The old key turned with a familiar resistance, the kind that reminded Evelyn the lock hadn't been used in a while. As the door creaked open, a soft scent greeted her aged, paper-dried oil paint and the quiet dust of memory. The apartment hadn't changed much. Neither had she, at least, not in the ways that mattered. The gallery room at the back was dim with the curtains half drawn. Sunlight filtered through the gauze, casting long stripes across the wooden floor. The easel stood in the far corner, its canvas covered with a thin sheet like a forgotten ghost. Evelyn walked past the shelves of brushes, the jars of pigments long sealed. Her fingers traced the edge of Marston's desk, landing on the small drawer with the brass handle. She pulled it open gently. There, beneath a stack of sketch paper and a half-used notebook, lay the envelope. Her name was on it, in his steady hand. Evelyn, for when you return. She didn't sit. She stood there in the silence, unfolding the letter with deliberate care. The ink had faded slightly, but the words remained. Don't let silence erase your name. Use it if needed. Memory can be a weapon or a bridge. Choose wisely, my dear. Her breath caught, not from pain, but recognition. He had always known she'd face this moment, or something like it. He had trusted she'd rise to meet it. She moved to the easel and lifted the sheet. The painting was half complete, a dining room warm but unfinished. Marston had left it there, an image he never titled. A man sat at the head of the table, his features soft, ambiguous. Opposite him, a chair empty. No one had ever filled it. Evelyn opened the paint drawer. The colours were still there, sealed tightly in their tubes. She mixed a muted violet with a faded ochre. Her hand was steady as she began to brush light into the scene, onto the empty plate, the untouched glass, the glint of silverware waiting for a guest. Behind her, the desk phone buzzed. She left the brush mid-stroke and walked over. "Olivia?" she answered. "Ceci," responded, came the voice on the other end. Calm, but bracing. "They're authorizing a preliminary investigation. It's not public yet, but they need your consent to access and cross-reference the material." Evelyn looked back at the painting. "What happens if I say no?" "Then it dies quietly. Buried in process." A long pause. "Then let my name be used this once," Evelyn said, "if it stops the cycle." She sat at Marston's desk, typed slowly, attached files, drafted no explanations, just one sentence in the body for what is owed to truth. She entered the subject line with careful precision. Subject. For the record. Evelyn Grace Whitmore. She hovered a moment, then pressed send. The whir of the fan above stirred the curtain just slightly. She looked again at the painting and dipped her brush into the violet. The chair opposite the man was no longer entirely empty, just not fully seen yet. Some memos are just reminders. Others are earthquakes. At precisely 9:17 a.m. on July 17th, the anniversary of Whitmore Lane's founding, a soft ping echoed through inboxes across the company. From the 12th floor's polished boardroom to the cramped intern desk beside the copy machine, a new subject line blinked with unassuming power. Memo from Evelyn G. Whitmore, co-founder. The building didn't shake. No alarms rang, but the air changed. Richard looked up from his tablet. A junior associate on the investment floor mouthed, "Is this real?" before clicking open the file. In the staff lounge, two marketing leads stopped mid-bite over their breakfast burritos. The intern by the copier froze, then leaned in. In a modest font, left-aligned and free of flourish, the message began, "To the current stewards of Whitmore Lane. I write not with demand, nor with nostalgia, but with clarity. When Marston and I founded this company, our first draft of the core mission contained only 4 words, profit must follow principle. We edited the sentence later, but we never abandoned its spirit. Over the past 9 years, I've watched that spirit erode not in headlines or scandals, but in shadows, shortcuts, and silences. I enclosed documentation regarding a series of financial actions taken under Nathan Whitmore's direction, including but not limited to reallocation of reserve funds to non-vetted ventures, suppression of audit findings in 2016 and 2019, non-disclosure of related party investments. I take no pleasure in disclosing this. I simply remember, and I choose not to forget. Titles can be revoked. Stock can be sold, but principle either lives or it does not. Signed, Evelyn Grace Whitmore, co-founder, former CEO. The memo landed like a snowball against a skyscraper window, quiet, but undeniable. In the conference room, Olivia sat beside Richard, both watching the Slack channel explode. A screenshot of the memo was already making rounds. Someone had overlaid Marston's old portrait in the background like a watermark. This went viral internally, Olivia murmured. She didn't smile. 4 minutes in parking level, B2 Nathan sat frozen in his Tesla. The air conditioning was on, but his skin felt cold. The subject line blinked up at him from the screen on his dash. He didn't open the email. He didn't have to. His phone buzzed again. A message from Richard pending vote to suspend Nathan Whitmore board convenes Monday. No angry emojis. No threats. Just a meeting invite, polite and sharp as glass. Upstairs, Evelyn closed her laptop. She did not reread what she had written. Her tea had gone lukewarm beside her. She took a sip anyway. She didn't feel triumphant, only steady, like returning to a place that once felt like home, not to reclaim it, but to ensure it remained honest. In the living room, Isabel lowered her phone slowly, brows tightened. "She won't stop," she said under her breath. Nathan didn't respond. Isabel's voice dropped an octave. "If your mother won't stay quiet, maybe we drown her out." The words hovered. Unspoken plans began to calcify behind them. "We write our own story, Nathan, so let's write hers before she does." The living room no longer resembled a place of rest. The coffee table had been shoved aside. A whiteboard now stood in its place, covered in smudged marker ink, bullet points, arrows, buzzwords, cognitive decline, overreach, founder, nostalgia. Protect brand. Nathan sat on the arm of the couch, his tie half loosened, sleeves rolled. Isabel stood at the board, uncapping another marker. "We don't need to attack," she said, pacing. "Just reframe. Seed doubt. Push the idea that she's holding on to the past. A little confused, not malicious, just outdated." Nathan didn't answer. He stared at the photograph in his hand, a printout he'd pulled from a drawer upstairs. It was from his 7th birthday. He sat on Evelyn's lap, wearing a pirate hat, his face lit with frosting and laughter. Her hands rested gently around his chest, steadying him. On the screen behind them, a young journalist was waiting on Zoom. Blake Isabel said crisply, "How's the draft?" Blake Reynolds, all angles and ambition, leaned forward. Working title, Power versus Memory, When Founders Won't Let Go. I've got quotes from recent governance reports on age and board efficacy. Sprinkle in some soft concern, industry insiders worry, you know the dance. Good. Isabel nodded. I'll handle placement. Reddit groups, a few LinkedIn pods, even an op-ed pitch to corporate modernity. I want people talking before the board meets. Nathan looked up. "You're really doing this? I'm preserving your job?" she snapped. "You don't think she's doing this out of maternal disappointment? This is legacy warfare." "She hasn't spoken publicly," Nathan said quietly. "Exactly," Isabel replied, "which makes her more dangerous. Everyone's projecting dignity onto her silence. We need to define her first." Blake smirked. Oldest PR move. Paint the vacuum before it speaks. Nathan stood, walked to the whiteboard and stared at the scribbled words. Cognitive decline. Outdated ideals. Unfit for strategy. He uncapped a marker, paused, then slowly began to erase. Isabel spun around. Nathan. She built all of this, he said, not looking at her. The strategy meetings, the mission, the walls. He stepped back from the now blank board. We're the ones trespassing. Silence fell. Blake cleared his throat. Well, I've already submitted. The piece is live. The words hit like a dropped glass. Nathan didn't flinch. He just turned and walked upstairs, the photograph still in his hand. Below, Isabel stared at the white space. A war had begun, but not all sides were ready. Sometimes an empty chair says more than a full room. The room shimmered with quiet anticipation. It was the annual public shareholders meeting, once a mere formality, now a spectacle. Every seat was filled. Light pooled gently over the polished mahogany table, casting faint reflections onto the leather-bound notebooks and steel water carafes. At the head of the table, just left of center, a single chair remained unoccupied. A slim, brushed metal nameplate rested in front of it. Whitmore. The chair hadn't been used in 8 years. Richard cleared his throat at the podium. Before we begin, he said we'd like to honor the person who made all this possible. A ripple of movement swept the room as people turned. Evelyn Whitmore walked in, not fast, but steady. No fanfare, no music, just her soft heels tapping the hardwood floor. She wore a dark navy jacket, her hair pulled back her eyes, calm. The chair waited. She paused behind it for a moment, then took her seat. No one said a word, but several stood. She didn't acknowledge them. When her time came to speak, she didn't read from notes. She didn't hold the microphone close. I'm not reclaiming power, she said gently. I'm reminding you where it came from. That was all. There was a pause, a long one, before Richard cleared his throat again and moved on to the agenda. Midway through the session, just as an investment strategy was being debated, a young man stood up from the guest section. He wore a cheap blazer that didn't quite fit and clutched a notebook to his chest. My name is Miguel Torres, he said nervously. I interned here in 2019. I'm now a senior analyst at Parker Row. I just found out. Mrs. Whitmore paid for my last year of college through a scholarship fund that didn't have her name on it. No ceremony, no letters. I only learned because a friend tracked the donation path. He looked at Evelyn. You changed my life. Quietly. Thank you. Murmurs followed. Someone at the back wiped their eyes. A staff photographer captured the scene. Evelyn's sitting hands folded the nameplate in front of her and Miguel mid-sentence. By evening, the image had spread across professional networks, captioned with everything from legacy over title to leadership that doesn't shout. That night, back at home, Sophie crawled into Nathan's lap while he stared blankly at his phone. Why do they stand when Grandma walks in? She asked, pointing at the photo on his screen. Nathan didn't answer. He stared at the image at the woman who had raised him, taught him to read stock tickers and fix dripping faucets, who now spoke in fewer words than ever, but carried more weight than any press release. When Evelyn left the shareholder meeting, she didn't linger. She simply stood, nodded to Richard, and walked toward the side doors. No one spoke, but one by one they rose, not to cheer, not to protest, just to stand. My final act as a shareholder is to let go. The sky outside was pale and wet, a thin layer of morning rain blurring the view from the tall windows of the law office. Drops clung to the glass like hesitant goodbyes. The room smelled of cooled coffee and old paper, the kind of space where decisions were made and echoed for years to come. Evelyn Whitmore sat across from Olivia at a wide glass table. The light was soft, refracted through water and silence. In front of her lay a stack of neatly bound documents, a single fountain pen resting atop them, the same pen Marston had once used to sign the founding charter of Whitmore Lane. The folder was labelled Transfer of Shares, the Whitmore Grace Fund. Olivia folded her hands, but didn't speak. She had already reviewed the documents twice that morning, arriving earlier than necessary. She knew what this meant, beyond legal terms and procedural clauses. Evelyn reached for the pen, slowly, deliberately. Her fingers paused over the signature line not from doubt, but from reverence. "One last act," she murmured. "You're sure?" Olivia asked softly. "I've never been more," Evelyn replied. Then, with fluid grace, she signed Evelyn Grace Whitmore. The sound of the pen on paper was quiet, but definitive. When she was done, Evelyn slid the papers across to Olivia, who glanced at the fund's name once more. "Grace," she whispered. "That's your middle name." Evelyn smiled. "And sometimes it's a destination." Outside, the rain had softened. Cars passed below headlights, faint in the overcast morning. Olivia stood to scan the final pages for digital confirmation. Evelyn, meanwhile, opened her phone. A single message blinked unread. "Nathan, can we talk?" I didn't know how far I'd gone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She didn't respond. Instead, she saved the message to a folder labelled Archive, Family, and powered the device off. When Olivia returned, her voice was steadier than her eyes. "The transfer's being processed now. You've officially gifted 36% of the company." "To the Whitmore Grace Fund," Evelyn said. "Not for legacy, for use." Olivia nodded. "It's set to support displaced employees, older students re-entering education, and women starting over." Evelyn's gaze moved to the window. "I used to fight for control," she said. "Now I choose peace." There was no applause, no witness, but Olivia. And yet something in the air shifted, as though the building itself had exhaled. The printer in the corner hummed to life. A final document slid out. Olivia picked it up, eyes scanning. Then she handed it to Evelyn with both hands. The heading was simple. Confirmation of transfer. Evelyn Grace Whitmore. Your shares have been successfully transferred. Evelyn folded the paper and slipped it into her bag without a word. She didn't need to keep it to remember. This isn't a plea. It's a record. The morning mist still hovered over the quiet street as Evelyn Whitmore stepped into the small neighbourhood post office. It was just past 7. The doors had opened only minutes before, and the place held the kind of stillness reserved for unspoken decisions. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the ticking of the wall clock echoed louder than necessary in the near-empty room. She clutched the envelope in her gloved hand, not too tightly, not with trembling fingers, but with the steady grip of someone who had waited long enough. The envelope was pale cream, smooth, untouched, until today. Inside, folded carefully, was the letter she had written nearly 5 years earlier. A letter meant to confront a Thanksgiving exclusion, an emotional dismissal that had never been spoken aloud but had echoed through her ever since. She had rewritten none of it, only added one final sentence in a steadier hand. The line still reverberated in her mind as she waited in front of the counter. "You feared shame. I carried yours for too long. I release both of us now." The postal clerk, a young woman with tired eyes and a polite voice, greeted her with a soft smile. "Would you like return receipt?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Evelyn considered it for a beat, then shook her head. "No," she said. "If he reads it, He'll know. She placed the envelope gently into the clerk's hand. The woman didn't ask who it was for. Some letters Evelyn thought didn't need explanation. They only needed release. She stepped toward the outbound mail bin, a red, time-worn fixture mounted on the wall. The slot was cool to the touch. With a breath, neither deep nor hesitant, Evelyn dropped the letter through. The sound it made was slight, not final, but certain. She didn't turn around to look at it again. Back home, she made tea without hurry. The kitchen still bore its usual silence, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirping of morning birds. She carried the mug to her room, her converted space at the back of the house, and opened her laptop. The screen glowed to life, revealing the file that had remained open since yesterday. After the party. The painting was nearly done. The dining room scene, soft watercolor hues, deliberate brushstrokes, captured a long table with shadows of former gatherings. A single chair remained prominently vacant. But this morning, Evelyn added one final stroke. A slant of light across the chair's seat, just enough to suggest warmth. She sat back, not smiling, not crying, just breathing in a way that felt clearer. In another city, perhaps in another morning routine, Nathan might see the envelope. He might open it, or he might not. She didn't know, and more importantly, she didn't need to. The act had been hers to make. That was enough. I was always there, she had written in closing. Now I choose to leave. Outside, the mist had begun to lift. The party had ended, but the echoes stayed. The air carried the scent of dry leaves and something quieter, like pages turning in an empty room. It was the first warm day of autumn, and the light fell gently through the long windows of the former studio, now a modest gallery space. Olivia had helped her restore it, scrubbing walls, rewiring soft bulbs, installing hanging rails. But today, it belonged to Evelyn alone. A single painting stood at the center easel, surrounded by soft white space. Framed, dusted, untouched since last night. The oils had dried just enough. It was finished. The title had never changed, After the Party. Evelyn stood with a cloth in hand, wiping the edges of the frame. Her gaze drifted across the brushstrokes, not in critique, but in silent recognition. The long table set for many a single chair, slightly askew its back, turned toward a shaft of afternoon light. A figure sat, with hands folded, face blurred, but posture unmistakably patient. Years of memory condensed into one image. No tears, no raised voices. Just space and the absence that spoke more loudly than presence ever could. Olivia entered with 2 paper cups of tea. "Do you want to sign it Whitmore? Or just Evelyn?" she asked, offering the cup. Evelyn took the pen. She signed simply and precisely in the lower right corner, GW. "Let them decide who that is," she said. By mid-morning, a few visitors arrived. Not many. A couple in their 60s who browsed slowly, a mother with a young girl who kept asking why there were no faces in the paintings. And one young man in a university sweatshirt who stopped in front of After the Party and remained still for nearly 5 minutes. "That's the chair from the photo circulating last month, isn't it?" Someone whispered near the doorway. Another person nodded quietly. No one mentioned the article. No one brought up the boardroom votes or the viral memo. The silence around Evelyn's name had transformed no longer neglect, but reverence. Older women lingered longer. Young ones looked thoughtful. The middle-aged glanced back over their shoulders as they left, as if the image had said something only they could hear. Evelyn didn't hover. She watched from the corner, hands folded. She wasn't trying to be seen, but she no longer feared being invisible. The young man finally turned to a friend and spoke, his voice barely above a breath. She didn't need to raise her voice, just her name. No one corrected him. No one added more. As the sun leaned westward and the shadows stretched thin across the gallery floor, Evelyn stepped to the door and gently flipped the wooden sign. Quiet day. Come back tomorrow. She offered a small smile to the final guests and locked the door. Inside the room grew still again. The painting remained on its easel, bathed in the last golden light of the day, the empty chair still aglow. Sometimes we plant not to harvest, but to remember we're still growing. The backyard was modest, just a square of earth, hemmed in by a wooden fence, sunlit and soft, with the scent of dry rosemary and old wood. A worn bench rested under a lattice of shade. On the small patio table, a ceramic cup held warm tea, its steam curling slowly into the afternoon light. Evelyn bent down beside a low clay planter near the fence. The lemon tree she had planted back in spring had begun to show its first sign of fruit, a pale green bulb, barely the size of a marble hidden under thick leaves. She didn't smile, not exactly, but her eyes lingered. Not on what had grown, but on the space around it, the earth she had turned, the water she had poured, the quiet she had claimed. From the back gate came the gentle creak of small footsteps. Sophie, dressed in a lavender jumper smudged with colour, held up a terracotta pot with both hands. Mint sprigs poked out from soft, crumbling soil. "I brought mint for your tea," the girl said. Evelyn knelt, brushing her hands clean. "That's very kind, sweetheart. Shall we plant it together?" Sophie nodded. They dug side by side, fingers touching earth. Sophie's laugh was quiet, like wind chimes nudged by breeze. When they finished, Evelyn poured water from a chipped tin can, then placed the mint beside the lemon tree. Together, they watched the droplets sink into the soil. For a long while, they simply sat. Sophie curled beside Evelyn's sketchbook on her lap, crayons rolling gently across the wooden slats of the bench. "Are you sad not to go back to the big building?" Sophie asked, her voice light, curious. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She looked at the lemon tree, the mint, the sun, catching the rim of her teacup. "I never left what mattered," she finally said. Sophie nodded, like she understood, even if she didn't quite yet. Then the gate creaked again. Evelyn turned slowly. Nathan stood there, unsure of whether to step in or stay out. He looked older, not in years, but in weight. A man returned not from victory or apology, but from a long walk through himself. In his hands, he held a frame wrapped in soft cloth. He said nothing. Evelyn didn't offer words either. He stepped forward and placed the frame gently on the patio table beside the cup of tea. The photo was old, slightly faded at the edges. Evelyn and Marston sat on a bench not unlike this one. A small Nathan, no older than Sophie, now beamed between them, arms thrown wide. Evelyn didn't pick up the frame. Her eyes rested on it, then on her son. "Leave it in the sun," she said. "It fades slower that way." Nathan gave a small nod and stepped back, not out of guilt, not quite out of shame, but as if realizing there was nothing more to take and maybe something left to give. Sophie looked from her father to her grandmother, then down at her sketchbook. Without a word, she scooted off the bench and sat cross-legged between them on the patio floor. She picked up a green crayon and began to draw. A small tree, thick roots, one round lemon. The shadows lengthened. Afternoon folded into itself. And still no one spoke. The breeze carried a faint citrus scent from the garden, brushing gently against Evelyn's cheek, as if the tree itself exhaled. Sophie hummed, while she drew her fingers, smudging shades of green and yellow into soft swirls. The sketch on her lap came to life, two figures on a bench, a tree overhead, and a small sun peeking in from the corner. She didn't say who the figures were. She didn't need to. Nathan remained standing, his hands in his coat pockets, the collar of his shirt still slightly wrinkled, likely from hours spent pacing, or perhaps sitting alone in his car before mustering the courage to walk through the gate. He glanced at the lemon tree. His lips parted slightly as if a word had formed, but dissolved before it met air. Evelyn didn't press him. She didn't look away either. It wasn't reconciliation she waited for. It wasn't apology. What she offered was simpler and therefore harder space. Nathan moved toward the edge of the yard, stopping beside the planter. He crouched down, ran a thumb across the rim of the clay pot Sophie had brought. He studied the mint, then the lemon leaves. His voice came low, almost unsure. "Do you think it'll bear fruit next season?" Evelyn sipped her tea, then let the cup rest in her hands. "It already has." Their eyes met briefly. There was something brittle in his gaze, but also a kind of awakening, as though the silence had spoken a language he had long forgotten. "I thought success was supposed to feel different," he said almost to himself. Evelyn smiled, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just with that sad wisdom of someone who'd walked further than she'd ever planned, only to realize home had been a different place all along. "Sometimes," she said, "we climb the wrong mountain. Doesn't mean we can't still come down." Sophie looked up from her drawing, her eyes squinting in the sun. "Grandma, what do you want me to name the tree?" Evelyn turned, amused. "I didn't know trees needed names." "They do. In stories." She considered it, looked at the slender trunk, the young leaves trembling, the single lemon that clung tight to the branch, like it had waited just long enough to witness this. "Name it." "Marston," Evelyn said. He was patient too. Nathan's head dropped slightly. A breeze stirred the edge of the photo frame on the table, as if even the past nodded in agreement. From down the street, the soft chime of an ice cream truck drifted in, followed by birdsong. The world moved forward as it always did. But for a few minutes in that yard, time folded into a stillness that held more weight than any applause, any verdict, any headline. Sophie added a little sun above the tree in her sketch, then looked satisfied. She stood and held it up. "This is us," she said. "And the tree." Nathan took a step closer to see. Evelyn nodded. "Then let's hang it inside, where it won't fade." Sophie beamed and ran inside. Nathan lingered. "I don't expect," he started. "I know," Evelyn interrupted, soft but firm. "That's why you came." He nodded again, the smallest bow of a man, humbled by the one thing he couldn't outmaneuver: memory. She didn't say goodbye when he left. He didn't either. Later, as dusk began to settle, Evelyn returned to the bench. The sun had shifted, casting long golden lines across the ground. She looked at the lemon tree now, still again. "I was always there. Now I choose to stay." The camera of life pulled back metaphorically quietly, revealing three things in soft balance: a woman, a tree, and a fading frame of memory catching the last light of day. And from the earth, a lemon held its place, small, steady, and real. The lemon tree bore its first fruit, not in triumph, but in quiet vindication. Evelyn never raised her voice yet. Her silence dismantled everything false around her, leaving only what was true, earned, and unshakable. Justice may arrive late, but when it does, it doesn't shout. It simply stands. Sometimes it only takes one chair left empty to remind the world who once filled the room. If this story stirred something in you, anger, hope, or memory, share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Your story too. Follow Grandma Stories 96 for more tales that speak softly, but strike deep.